I'm Gemma, 28 years old, and I was just pouring coffee for my father when he dropped the question that shattered my world. $200,000, Gemma. What did you do with it? My hand trembled, hot coffee splashing onto the marble counter. 200,000? What are you talking about? His face darkened with rage I'd never seen before. That's when I noticed my sister Bethany in the doorway, her face drained of all color, clutching her designer purse like a lifeline. Before we dive into what happened next, let me know where you're watching from today. If you've ever experienced family betrayal or financial deception, hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories. Trust me, what unfolds in this story will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about family loyalty. So grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and let me tell you how my entire world came crashing down on what should have been a peaceful Sunday morning. It was supposed to be our regular Sunday brunch at my parents' Connecticut estate. The October sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of their dining room, casting golden light on the mahogany table that had hosted countless family meals. I'd driven up from the city that morning, exhausted after a 12-hour shift at the pediatric ward where I worked as a nurse. My scrubs had been traded for a simple blue dress, nothing fancy compared to what my family usually wore to these gatherings. My father Richard, a retired investment banker, sat at the head of the table in his pressed polo shirt and khakis, the uniform of wealthy men who no longer needed to wear suits. My mother Dorothy perched beside him, her pearl necklace catching the light, her perfectly manicured nails tapping impatiently on her champagne flute. My older sister Bethany had arrived early as always with her husband Carson in tow. At 31, she embodied everything our parents valued, married to a successful corporate lawyer, living in a sprawling house in Westchester, driving a white Mercedes that gleamed like her veneered smile. She wore a cream-colored designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Her blonde highlights, freshly done her wedding ring, practically blinding in the morning light. Carson sat beside her, scrolling through his phone with the practiced indifference of a man who billed $400 an hour. My younger brother Tyler was notably absent, though that wasn't unusual. At 26, he was the family's black sheep, pursuing his art in Brooklyn, while living in what our mother called squalor, but what he called authentic urban living. The atmosphere had been tense from the moment I walked in. My mother had given me her usual once-over, her lips pursing at my simple appearance, but I was used to that. What I wasn't used to was the way my father kept staring at me throughout breakfast, his jaw clenched, his fingers drumming on the table. I'd tried to make small talk about my work, sharing a story about a young patient who'd finally gone into remission, but nobody seemed interested. Bethany kept checking her phone and whispering to Carson while my mother rearranged her eggs Benedict without eating. That's when my father dropped the bomb that changed everything. After I'd gotten up to refill my coffee, he'd followed me to the kitchen sidebar, and that's when he asked about the $200,000. The coffee pot shook in my hands as I tried to process his words. Dad, I honestly have no idea what you're talking about. What, $200,000? His face turned an alarming shade of red, the vein in his forehead that only appeared during his angriest moments beginning to pulse. Don't you dare play dumb with me, Gemma. Your grandmother's money. The inheritance she left specifically for you before she died. The money that's been withdrawn from the account. In cash. Over the past 3 months. My grandmother Rose had passed away 6 months ago after a brief battle with pancreatic cancer. I'd been devastated, spending every free moment at her bedside during her final weeks. She'd been more than a grandmother to me. She'd been my confidant, the one person in our family who understood why I'd chosen nursing over business school, who celebrated my small apartment and second-hand car as signs of independence, rather than failure. If she'd left me money, surely someone would have told me, Dad, I swear on Grandma Rose's grave I knew nothing about any inheritance. Are you absolutely certain she left me money and that it's been withdrawn? Richard slammed his hand on the marble counter, making me jump and splash more coffee. Of course, I'm certain I've been managing the estate and I only discovered it because the bank called about unusual activity. Someone has been withdrawing the maximum cash amount every few days for months. And guess whose signatures are on those withdrawal slips, Gemma? Yours. My mind raced, trying to make sense of this accusation. I hadn't been to that bank in years, preferring to use the credit union near my hospital. Can I see these withdrawal slips? Because I promise you I haven't taken any money. I didn't even know there was money to take. That's when I noticed Bethany had crept closer to the kitchen doorway, her face pale as fresh snow, her hands gripping her designer purse so tightly her knuckles were white. Maybe Gemma just forgot, she said, her voice unnaturally high. I mean, she works such long hours and stress can make people do strange things. Perhaps she needed the money for something and doesn't want to admit it. The suggestion hit me like a physical blow. My own sister implying I was either a thief or mentally unstable. Bethany, you know me better than that. When have I ever taken anything that wasn't mine? When have I ever even asked for money? My mother appeared beside Bethany, her face a mask of cold disappointment. Well, darling, people change. And you have been looking rather tired lately. Those bags under your eyes, the weight you've lost. One has to wonder what's really going on in that city of yours. The insinuation in her tone was clear, and I felt my stomach drop. They were suggesting I had some kind of secret addiction or debt, something that would drive me to steal from my own grandmother's estate. Are you seriously implying I'm on drugs or something? I look tired because I work 60-hour weeks taking care of sick children. I've lost weight because I barely have time to eat between shifts. Richard returned from his study carrying a manila folder thick with bank statements. He spread them across the kitchen island like evidence in a court case, his finger jabbing at various entries. Look at this, Gemma. October 15th, $20,000. October 20th, another $20,000. October 27th, $15,000. It goes on and on. All cash withdrawals, all with your signature. I leaned over the papers, my heart pounding as I examined the signatures. They looked like mine, but something was off. The way the G curved the angle of the crossing on the double M's, it was close, very close, but not quite right. Dad, these signatures, they're similar to mine, but look at the way the letters connect. I don't write like that. Oh, please, Bethany interjected, moving closer to examine the papers herself. You're really going to claim someone forged your signature. How convenient. Next, you'll be saying someone stole your identity, too. Her sarcasm stung, but what hurt more was the way she wouldn't quite meet my eyes. Carson had joined us now, his lawyer instincts apparently kicking in. Richard, if Gemma is denying these withdrawals, perhaps we should involve the authorities. File a police report. Get to the bottom of this officially. The threat hung in the air like a storm cloud. My own family was threatening to have me arrested. Maybe we should all calm down, I suggested, trying to keep my voice steady. There has to be an explanation for this. Can we check the bank's security footage? Talk to the tellers who process these withdrawals? Someone must remember handling this much cash. But even as I spoke, I saw the doubt in my father's eyes, the disappointment in my mother's face, and the strange flickering guilt in Bethany's expression. The family that had gathered for Sunday brunch was fracturing before my eyes, and I was being cast as the villain in a crime I didn't commit. What I didn't know then was that this was only the beginning, and the real betrayal was yet to be revealed. The tension in the kitchen was suffocating as I stared at those bank statements, my mind racing to make sense of what was happening. I need to see the actual withdrawal slips. I insisted, my voice stronger now. Not just these statements, the original documents from the bank. My father's eyes narrowed, but he nodded curtly. Fine. We'll go to the bank first thing tomorrow morning. But Gemma, if you're lying to me, if you've taken this money and spent it on God knows what, there will be consequences. Severe consequences. The threat in his voice was clear, and I felt a chill run down my spine. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about my place in the family. As I examined the signatures more closely, a memory suddenly surfaced like a bubble breaking through water. 3 months ago, Bethany had called me in a panic. She'd said Carson needed my driver's license for some background check related to a new client, something about verifying family members for a high-security corporate account. I'd been in the middle of a shift, exhausted and distracted, and she'd seemed so urgent, so desperate. She'd driven all the way to the hospital, waited in the parking lot, and I'd run down during my break to give it to her. She'd promised to return it within an hour, and she had, but now that moment seemed significant in a way it hadn't before. "Bethany," I said, slowly watching her face carefully. "Do you remember when you borrowed my ID a few months back? For Carson's background check?" The color drained from her face so quickly I thought she might faint. I I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, but her hands were shaking now, rattling the gold bracelets on her wrist. Carson stepped forward, his lawyer facade firmly in place. "That's completely irrelevant to this situation. My firm runs hundreds of background checks. Even if Bethany did borrow your ID, which I don't recall, it would have nothing to do with these withdrawals." But Tyler chose that moment to make his entrance, and his timing couldn't have been more perfect. My younger brother stood in the doorway, his paint-stained jeans and vintage band t-shirt, a stark contrast to everyone else's formal attire. His dark hair was messy, his beard unkempt, but his eyes were sharp and focused. "Actually, it might have everything to do with it," he said quietly, and every head in the room turned to him. "I've seen Bethany at the bank, multiple times, always wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap, which seemed weird since she usually wouldn't be caught dead in anything that casual." The room erupted. Bethany spun toward Tyler, her face contorting with rage. "How dare you? You're never even here, and now you show up to make accusations you don't know what you're talking about." Carson moved protectively toward his wife, his hand on her shoulder. "Tyler, that's a serious allegation. You better be certain about what you're saying." My mother predictably rushed to Bethany's defense. "Tyler, you've always been jealous of your sister's success. This is low even for you." But my father held up a hand for silence, his businessman's instincts finally overriding his paternal bias. "Tyler, tell us exactly what you saw." Tyler pulled out his phone, scrolling through it with purpose. "I work at the coffee shop across from the First National branch on Maple Street. About 2 months ago, I saw Bethany going in there. I thought it was weird because she banks at Chase always has. She was dressed down like she didn't want to be recognized. I even took a picture because I thought it was funny seeing her in athletic wear." He turned the phone toward us, and there it was, a slightly blurry but unmistakable photo of Bethany entering the bank, wearing exactly what Tyler had described. The date stamp showed October 18th, just 3 days after one of the large withdrawals. Bethany's reaction was immediate and vicious. "So what if I went to a bank that doesn't prove anything? You know what I think? I think Gemma and Tyler are in this together. Look at her defending him and him showing up conveniently with his little photos. Gemma probably gave him some of the money. How else could he afford to keep that studio in Brooklyn?" The accusation was so outrageous I actually laughed, a harsh sound in the tense room. Tyler and I conspiring. He didn't even know about the inheritance until 5 minutes ago. But Bethany was on a roll now, her desperation manifesting as aggression. "You know what else I think? I think Gemma has a problem. A serious problem. I've seen her at the hospital looking haggard, talking to some pretty sketchy people. Some of the other nurses have mentioned she's been acting strange, taking extra shifts, always needing money. Maybe she's got a gambling problem. Or worse." The lies came so easily to her, flowing like poison from her perfectly glossed lips. "That's completely insane," I protested, but I could see doubt creeping into my parents' faces. Bethany had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. Her words carried weight that mine never had. My mother nodded slowly, her face a mask of false concern. "Now that you mention it, Gemma has been looking unwell. And she did ask me for a loan last year. Remember? For her car repairs? Maybe this goes deeper than we thought. Maybe she's been struggling financially and was too proud to ask for help. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I asked for a $500 loan because my transmission died, and I paid you back within a month. How does that translate to stealing $200,000? Carson cleared his throat, his lawyer voice taking over. Perhaps we should consider the possibility that Gemma is unwell. Stress can do terrible things to people. There are facilities that can help with various dependencies, discreet ones. I know some excellent programs through my firm. They were trying to paint me as an addict, a gambler, someone who needed to be institutionalized. The coordinated attack was so swift, so calculated, that I realized this wasn't spontaneous. This felt planned. Enough, I shouted, surprising everyone, including myself. I'm not an addict, I'm not a gambler, and I'm not a thief. Someone forged my signature and stole that money, and instead of trying to find out who really did it, you're all ready to ship me off to rehab for a problem I don't have. Dad, you taught me about financial forensics when I was 12. You know there are ways to track this. Security footage teller records the serial numbers on the cash if it was recorded. Why aren't we pursuing those angles instead of attacking me? Richard seemed to consider this, his analytical mind finally engaging. The bank manager did mention they could pull security footage, but it would take a formal request. And if we involve the authorities, he trailed off, the implications clear. If they reported it as theft, and I was found responsible, I could face serious jail time. But if they didn't report it, the money was gone forever. Bethany seized on his hesitation. Dad, we can't go to the police. Think of the scandal. Think of what it would do to the family name, to your reputation. Let's handle this privately. Gemma can get help, quietly return whatever money is left, and we can move forward. The way she said whatever money is left made my blood boil. She was already assuming I'd spent it probably on drugs or gambling debts in her twisted narrative. Tyler stepped forward again, his phone still in hand. I have more photos, different days. And here's something interesting. Bethany's car was always parked in the 2-hour visitor section, but she never got a ticket. Almost like she knew exactly how long each transaction would take. You've been stalking me. Bethany shrieked, her composure finally cracking completely. Taking pictures of me without my knowledge? That's illegal? Carson, can't we sue him for this? But her reaction was too extreme for someone innocent. Even my parents seemed to notice it. Carson tried to calm her, but she shrugged him off violently. No, I won't stand here and be accused by the family dropout and the family disappointment. Gemma has obviously stolen this money, and now she's turned Tyler against me with her lies. I studied my sister carefully, seeing her perhaps for the first time. The designer dress, the expensive jewelry, the constant need to present a perfect image. It all suddenly seemed like a facade. Bethany, are you and Carson having financial troubles? The question was quiet, but it landed like a bomb. Her face went from pale to flushed in seconds. How dare you? We're doing perfectly fine, better than fine. Carson just made partner, and we're about to close on a vacation home in the Hamptons. But Carson's face told a different story. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Then you won't mind if we investigate this properly? I challenged. If you have nothing to hide, you should want the real thief caught just as much as I do. Unless... I let the word hang in the air, heavy with implication. Bethany's next words came out in a rush, desperate and angry. Unless what? Unless I'm the thief, is that what you're suggesting? Mom, Dad, are you going to let her stand there and accuse me? I'm the one who visits every week, who maintains the family standards, who makes you proud, and this is how I'm treated. The family was fracturing before my eyes, alliances shifting like sand. Tyler stood firmly beside me now, his presence a comfort I hadn't expected. My parents seemed caught between their favored daughter and mounting evidence that something wasn't right. And Bethany, perfect Bethany, was revealing cracks in her facade that suggested something much darker lurked beneath. As we stood there in that beautiful kitchen surrounded by all the trappings of wealth and success, I realized that someone in this room had betrayed me in the worst possible way. And I was going to find out who, even if it cost me everything. The next morning arrived with gray skies and a bitter wind that seemed to match my mood perfectly. I'd spent a sleepless night in my childhood bedroom staring at the ceiling and replaying every interaction with my family over the past few months. By dawn, I'd made a decision. If my family wouldn't help me clear my name, I'd have to do it myself. I dressed carefully in my most professional outfit, a black pantsuit I usually reserved for court appearances when advocating for my young patients. If I was going to fight for my reputation, I needed to look the part. My first stop was the law office of Sandra Chen, an attorney who'd helped several nurses at my hospital with various legal issues. Her office was small, but efficient, located above a Thai restaurant in Queens. The smell of pad Thai wafted up through the floorboards as I explained my situation, showing her the bank statements and sharing Tyler's photos. Sandra listened intently, taking notes in precise handwriting, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. "This is definitely fraud," she said finally. "And from what you're describing, it sounds premeditated. The borrowing of your ID, the multiple withdrawals structured to avoid reporting requirements, the choice of a bank where you don't have regular accounts. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. Someone planned this carefully." The validation of my suspicions was a relief, but her next words sobered me. "However, proving it will be challenging. Forged signatures can be difficult to dispute, especially if the forger had access to genuine samples. And if your sister is involved, family dynamics will complicate everything. I'll need a $5,000 retainer to start." $5,000? It might as well have been $5 million. My savings account held barely $3,000 earmarked for emergencies and the continuing education credits I needed for my nursing license. But what choice did I have? I wrote the check with a steady hand, even as I calculated how many extra shifts I'd need to pick up to survive the coming months. Sandra promised to start immediately, beginning with a formal request for the bank's security footage and a forensic handwriting analysis. In the meantime, she advised, be very careful what you say to your family. Anything you tell them could potentially be used against you if this escalates to criminal charges. I left her office and drove directly to the hospital, hoping work would provide some normalcy in my suddenly chaotic life. But as soon as I badged in, I knew something was wrong. My colleagues, usually warm and chatty, seemed to avoid my eyes. Conversations stopped when I entered the break room. My supervisor, Janet, intercepted me before I could reach the pediatric ward. "Gemma, we need to talk. Can you come to my office?" Her tone was professional but cold, lacking the maternal warmth she usually showed. In her office, Janet closed the door and gestured for me to sit. On her desk was a manila folder that I recognized with a sinking heart as an employee complaint form. "We received a concerning call this morning," she began, not quite meeting my eyes. "An anonymous complaint alleging that you've been exhibiting erratic behavior possibly related to substance abuse. The caller claimed to be a family member worried about your access to controlled medications." My hands clenched in my lap as I fought to keep my voice steady. "Let me guess. The caller mentioned I might have a gambling problem too. Maybe suggested I've been stealing to feed an addiction." Janet's surprise confirmed my suspicions. "How did you—" "Yes, actually. They were quite specific about their concerns. Gemma, I've known you for 4 years. You're one of our best nurses. But I have to follow protocol. We need you to submit to a drug test, and pending those results, you'll be placed on administrative leave." The world tilted sideways. My job, my calling. The one thing I'd built independent of my family's influence was being ripped away. "Janet, I'll take any test you want right now. Blood, urine, hair follicle, whatever proves I'm clean, because I am. This is a family matter that's spilled over and someone is trying to destroy my life." The drug test was humiliating, even though I knew I'd pass. What was worse was the walk of shame back through the hospital collecting my belongings from my locker, while my colleagues watched with a mixture of pity and suspicion. As I packed up my stethoscope and the small collection of drawings my young patients had made for me, my phone buzzed with a text from Tyler. Found something. Meet me at the coffee shop ASAP. Don't tell anyone where you're going. Tyler was waiting in the back corner of his workplace, a hipster coffee shop that served cortados in mason jars and played obscure indie music. He looked exhausted but excited, sliding a tablet across the reclaimed wood table as soon as I sat down. "I've been doing some digging," he said quietly. "Remember how Bethany bragged about Carson making partner? I have a friend who works at his firm. Turns out that was a lie. Carson didn't make partner. In fact, he's been on probation for the last 6 months after losing a major client due to some questionable billing practices." The information hit me like a physical blow. "Are you sure?" Tyler nodded, pulling up more documents on his tablet. "It gets worse. They've been living way beyond their means. That house in Westchester, they're 3 months behind on the mortgage. The Mercedes leased and they've missed payments. My friend says the firm's been getting calls from collection agencies. They're drowning in debt, Gemma. Desperate people do desperate things." I stared at the evidence pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with sickening clarity. The bank employee who processed the withdrawals. We need to find out who it was. If Bethany and Carson were desperate enough to steal from Grandma's estate, they didn't do it alone. Someone at that bank helped them. Tyler was already ahead of me, pulling up the bank's website on his phone. "Way ahead of you. I've been charming the barista who works mornings. Turns out her roommate works at First National. Name's Maria. She mentioned her coworker Anna has been flashing a lot of cash lately. New car designer bags, talking about a promotion that never materialized." We spent the next hour strategizing, and Tyler revealed he'd been documenting more than just Bethany's bank visits. He showed me screenshots of her social media posts, carefully dated and tagged, that contradicted the times she claimed to be elsewhere. Photos from a spa day in the city when bank records showed a withdrawal in Connecticut. A business lunch with Carson that took place during another suspicious transaction. "I started paying attention after Grandma died," he admitted. "Bethany was so weird at the funeral, kept asking about the will, about whether Grandma had any separate accounts. It didn't sit right with me." My phone rang, interrupting our planning. It was Sandra, my lawyer, and she sounded urgent. "Gemma, I just got a call from opposing counsel. Your brother-in-law's firm is threatening a cease and desist order. They're claiming you're harassing your sister and spreading defamatory statements about their financial situation. This is an intimidation tactic, but it's going to complicate things." I laughed bitterly. "Of course they are. They're trying to silence me before I can prove what they did." As if the day couldn't get worse, my phone buzzed with a text from my landlord. "Your father called. Says there are some concerns about your stability. Given the circumstances, I think it's best if you find alternative housing. You have 30 days. My hands shook as I read the message. My own father was now actively working to destroy my life, all based on Bethany's lies. Tyler read the text over my shoulder and cursed creatively. "He's systematically cutting you off from everything. Job, housing. What's next?" We found out what was next when I tried to buy coffee and my credit card was declined. Then the next one. And the next. A call to my bank revealed that my accounts had been frozen due to suspicious activity, reported by a concerned family member. I had less than $40 cash in my wallet and no access to my own money. "This is insane," I muttered, slumping in my chair. "They're trying to force me into a corner where I have no choice but to confess to something I didn't do." But Tyler wasn't done with his revelations. "There's one more thing," he said, pulling up an email on his tablet. "Remember Anna, the bank employee? My barista friend got her roommate Maria to talk. Anna's been bragging about helping with some family matter for a big law firm. Said she was promised a job as a legal secretary once everything was settled. Carson's firm, Gemma. She specifically mentioned Carson's firm. The corruption ran deeper than I'd imagined. My sister and her husband had orchestrated an elaborate fraud, recruited a bank employee with promises of career advancement, and were now using every resource at their disposal to frame me for their crime. As I sat in that coffee shop, effectively homeless and jobless, cut off from my own money and abandoned by my parents, I realized I was in a fight, not just for my reputation, but for my freedom. Because if Bethany and Carson succeeded in their frame-up, I wouldn't just lose my family, I'd lose everything. We need more than circumstantial evidence, I said, finally, my mind racing through possibilities. We need Anna to talk. Or we need those security recordings from the bank. Something concrete that proves Bethany was the one making those withdrawals. Tyler nodded, a determined glint in his eye that reminded me why he'd always been my favorite sibling. Then let's get it. They may have money and connections, but we have something they don't. The truth. And we're going to use it to bury them. As we planned our next moves, I couldn't help but think about how quickly family could become enemies. Just days ago, I'd been a respected nurse with a stable life and a place in my family. Now, I was effectively homeless, suspended from work, and fighting fraud charges while my own sister worked to destroy me. But Tyler was right about one thing. We had the truth on our side. The question was whether that would be enough when facing people willing to lie, steal, and destroy their own family for money. 3 days into my nightmare, I was sleeping on Tyler's couch in his Brooklyn studio when his phone buzzed at 2 in the morning. The apartment was tiny, barely 500 square feet, with canvases stacked against every wall and the constant smell of turpentine and oil paint. But it was safe, and right now, that was everything. Tyler answered groggily, then sat bolt upright. "Maria, slow down. What do you mean, Anna's scared?" He put the call on speaker and a young woman's frantic voice filled the room. "Anna's been crying all night," Maria said. "She knows something bad is happening. Those people she helped, the lawyer and his wife, they've been calling her nonstop, telling her to keep quiet or she'll be charged as an accomplice. She didn't know it was fraud when she started. They told her it was a family emergency, that the old lady wanted her granddaughter to have the money, but there was some legal complication. Anna believed them because the woman looked so much like the photo on the ID. I grabbed the phone, my heart racing. "Maria, this is Gemma. I'm the one being framed. Will Anna talk to me? Or to my lawyer? We can protect her if she tells the truth." There was a long pause, then Maria sighed. "She's terrified. That lawyer, Carson, he told her she'd go to prison for bank fraud. Said he'd make sure she was prosecuted to the fullest extent. But she kept copies of their text messages. Insurance, she called it. Maybe if you could guarantee she won't be charged?" Tyler was already pulling on his shoes, and I followed suit. Within an hour, we were sitting in a 24-hour diner in Astoria across from 2 young women who looked like they hadn't slept in days. Anna was tiny, with dark circles under her eyes and hands that shook as she clutched her coffee cup. Maria sat protectively beside her, shooting us suspicious glances. I let Sandra, my lawyer, who'd met us there, take the lead. "Anna, I understand you're scared," Sandra said gently. "But right now, you're in a position to correct a terrible wrong. If you cooperate fully, provide evidence and testimony, I can work with the prosecutor to ensure you receive immunity in exchange for your cooperation. You are manipulated by people in positions of power. That matters." Anna's story came out in fits and starts, punctuated by tears and long pauses. It had started 2 months ago when Carson had come to the bank, charming and professional, asking to speak with her privately. He'd spun a tale of family drama, an elderly grandmother who wanted to leave money to her granddaughter, but was being controlled by other family members. He'd shown Anna my ID, explained that I was too intimidated by my father to come myself. The withdrawals needed to be in cash to avoid detection by the controlling family members. It sounded like a movie plot, but Anna, 23 and impressed by the handsome lawyer, had believed it. "The woman came in wearing a wig," Anna whispered. "Brown hair like in the ID photo. She had sunglasses and kept her head down, but she was nice, you know. thanked me for helping her sick grandmother, said the money would help her escape an abusive situation. My stomach turned as I realized how Bethany had played the victim even while victimizing me. But then the withdrawals kept getting bigger and I started feeling uncomfortable. When I asked about it, Carson said it was almost over, just a few more transactions. He promised me a job at his firm, said I was smart and deserved better than being a bank teller. Anna pulled out her phone with trembling fingers, showing us the text messages. They were damning. Carson directing her to process withdrawals without triggering reporting requirements. Bethany confirming dates and times when Gemma would arrive. Instructions to delete security footage which Anna had been too scared to follow through on. I knew it was wrong, she admitted. But they kept saying it was for a good cause, that they were helping you. And then last week, when everything exploded, Carson called and said, if I breathed a word, he'd make sure I was charged with federal bank fraud. Said I'd manipulated the system for personal gain because of the job promise. Sandra was taking rapid notes, her expression growing more confident with each revelation. Anna, this is exactly what we need. These texts, your testimony. They prove conspiracy to commit fraud. You were a tool they used, not a mastermind. The prosecutor will see that. We spent another 2 hours going through everything, documenting dates, times, and amounts. Anna even remembered which wig Bethany had worn, purchased from a costume shop that might have security footage of their own. As dawn broke over Queens, we had what we desperately needed, a witness and evidence. But Anna's next words chilled me. There's something else. Last week, Carson came to the bank again. He was asking about ways to make it look like someone was laundering money. He had questions about cash deposits, structuring, how to make it appear someone was hiding illegal income. I think they're planning something worse. Tyler's hand found mine under the table, squeezing reassuringly. My baby brother, who I'd always thought of as the flaky artist, had become my rock in this storm. We need to move fast, he said, before they can execute whatever new plan they're cooking up. Sandra nodded, already pulling out her phone. I'm calling the bank's legal department as soon as they open. With Anna's cooperation, we can get those security tapes before anyone thinks to destroy them. Over the next few days, our small team worked tirelessly. Sandra filed formal requests with the bank, while simultaneously preparing Anna's immunity agreement. Tyler used his network of artist friends to investigate Bethany and Carson's public facade, uncovering a web of lies about phantom business deals and non-existent investments. One friend, a photographer who worked society events, had dozens of photos of Bethany at charity galas, wearing jewelry she'd reportedly sold to pay for Carson's mother's medical bills. Another lie designed to extract money from sympathetic friends. But it was Robert Dalton, the senior bank manager, who became our most powerful ally. Sandra's formal request had triggered an internal audit, and Robert, a methodical man nearing retirement, didn't like what he found. He called us personally, his voice tight, with controlled anger. I've been with First National for 30 years, he said. We've never had a breach like this. Anna wasn't the only one who noticed irregularities, but she was the only one directly involved. I've pulled all the security footage from the past 6 months. Your sister is clearly visible in multiple frames despite her attempts at disguise. We met Robert at the bank after hours, and he showed us the footage on his office computer. There she was, Bethany, in a brown wig and sunglasses, conducting withdrawal after withdrawal. In some frames, you could see her designer watch the same one she'd worn to our grandmother's funeral. In others, her distinctive gait, a slight favor of her left leg from an old tennis injury, was unmistakable. This is ironclad evidence, Robert said. I've already contacted the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. This level of fraud crossing state lines using false identification. It's federal. The net was closing around Bethany and Carson, but they weren't going down without a fight. The next morning, I woke to find Tyler's studio surrounded by police cars. 2 officers were at the door with a search warrant, claiming they'd received a tip about drug activity. They found nothing, of course, but the message was clear. Carson was using his legal connections to harass us. That afternoon, Sandra's office was burglarized, though thankfully she'd kept all our evidence in a safety deposit box. Then came the most disturbing attack. A call to Tyler's employer claiming he was dealing drugs from the coffee shop. "They're getting desperate," Sandra observed as we regrouped in her hastily reorganized office. "Desperate people make mistakes. We need to be ready." She was right. The mistake came in the form of Bethany reaching out to my Aunt Helen, my mother's sister, who'd helped raise us after Mom went through a rough patch when we were young. Aunt Helen had always been neutral in family disputes, but Bethany's lies finally pushed her too far. Aunt Helen called me on a Thursday evening, her voice thick with emotion. "Gemma, honey, I need to tell you something. Bethany came to see me today. She was manic talking about how you were ruining her life, how she needed money to fight the false accusations. She asked me for $50,000. When I hesitated, she threatened me, said she knew things about my taxes that could get me in trouble. Gemma, I think your sister has lost her mind." The conversation was painful but necessary. Aunt Helen agreed to provide a statement about Bethany's attempted extortion, adding another piece to our growing pile of evidence. More importantly, she offered something I desperately needed: emotional support. "I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner," she said. "Bethany always seemed so perfect, but perfection like that, it's often hiding something dark." We talked for hours about family patterns, about how my grandmother had always seen through Bethany's facade, which might have been why she'd left me the money in a separate trust. As the week progressed, our allies multiplied. The barista from Tyler's coffee shop put us in touch with other bank employees who'd noticed irregularities. A paralegal from Carson's firm, disgusted by his behavior, leaked information about his debts and the firm's plans to terminate him. Even some of Bethany's society friends began reaching out, sharing stories of loans never repaid and lies about family emergencies. The image of the golden couple was tarnishing rapidly. But the most unexpected ally came in the form of my father's former business partner, Stephen Chen. He'd been following the family drama through the grapevine and was appalled by what he heard. "Your father is being a fool," he told me bluntly over lunch at his club. "I've known you since you were in pigtails, Gemma. You're the most honest person in that family. If Richard can't see that Bethany is playing him, then he deserves what's coming." Stephen offered not just moral support but practical help, connecting me with a forensic accountant who could trace exactly where the stolen money had gone. As our evidence mounted and our allies rallied, I began to feel something I hadn't experienced since that horrible Sunday brunch: hope. Bethany and Carson had expected me to crumble, to be isolated and defenseless. Instead, they'd awakened a network of people who were tired of their lies and manipulation. The truth, as Tyler had predicted, was proving to be a powerful weapon. But I knew the hardest battles were still ahead. Bethany wouldn't give up easily, and she still had our parents' trust. The war for my innocence was far from over. The call from Robert Dalton came at 6 in the morning on a Tuesday, exactly 2 weeks after my world had imploded. His voice was urgent but triumphant. "Gemma, we found it. The smoking gun. Can you and your lawyer meet me at the bank in an hour?" I was already pulling on clothes, my hands shaking with anticipation. Tyler drove me in his beat-up Honda, both of us silent with tension. Sandra met us in the bank's parking lot, her usually immaculate appearance slightly disheveled in her rush to get there. Robert led us to a conference room where he'd set up multiple laptops and screens. After Anna's confession, I had my IT team do a deep dive into our systems. He began, his fingers flying over the keyboard. "We found something interesting: the security footage Anna was supposed to delete. She only deleted the lobby cameras. She didn't know about our secondary system that monitors the vault area. Look at this." The screen flickered to life, showing a clear view of the bank's interior. There was Bethany, her disguise barely concealing her identity, but what happened next made us all gasp. In the footage, Bethany approached the teller window where Anna waited. But instead of the confident woman who'd been withdrawing money for weeks, she appeared nervous, constantly checking her phone. Then, clear as day, we saw her remove her sunglasses to wipe her eyes, giving the camera a perfect view of her face. "This is from the final withdrawal," Robert explained, "but watch what happens next." The footage continued, and we saw Bethany stuff the cash into a designer bag I recognized, a limited edition piece she'd bragged about at last Christmas dinner. Then she made a phone call, and though there was no audio, her mouth movements were clear enough to read. "I got it all. Meet you at the office." "That's not all." Robert continued, switching to another file. "Our forensic team traced the serial numbers on some of the bills. Large cash withdrawals like these are always recorded. Guess where some of those bills showed up? At a luxury car dealership where Carson paid cash for a down payment on a new Porsche. At a high-end jewelry store where Bethany bought a $30,000 necklace. At a country club paying off 6 months of overdue membership fees." The evidence was overwhelming. Each transaction was documented, traced, and verified. But Robert saved the best for last. "This morning, I received a call from a colleague at another bank." He said, his expression grave. "Carson tried to open a new account there yesterday under a false name. He was carrying $90,000 in cash. My colleague recognized him from a financial crimes bulletin we'd circulated. He's being held for questioning as we speak." The room erupted in excited chatter. Carson, in his desperation, had made the crucial mistake that would bring everything crashing down. Sandra was already on her phone with the prosecutor, relaying the information. "They want to move immediately," she said after hanging up. "Arrest warrants will be issued within the hour." But even as we celebrated this victory, I couldn't shake a feeling of unease. Bethany was too smart to let Carson take all the risks. She had to have a backup plan. My instincts proved correct when my phone buzzed with a call from my mother. Her voice was ice cold. "Gemma, I don't know what game you're playing, but you need to stop this vendetta against your sister immediately. She's at my house, hysterical, saying you've manufactured evidence against her. This ends now, or you'll no longer be welcome in this family." I put her on speaker so Sandra could hear. "Mom, Bethany has been caught on camera stealing Grandma's money. Carson's been arrested trying to launder the cash. This isn't a vendetta. It's justice." My mother's laugh was bitter. "Justice. You've always been jealous of Bethany. She told me everything. How you've struggled with gambling, how you came to her begging for money, how she tried to help you. And this is how you repay her, by framing her for your crimes." The lies were so audacious I was momentarily speechless. Sandra took the phone from my hand. "Mrs. Hamilton, this is Sandra Chen, Gemma's attorney. I strongly advise you not to make any statements that could be construed as witness intimidation or obstruction of justice. Your daughter Bethany is about to be arrested for federal fraud charges. The evidence is incontrovertible." The silence on the other end was deafening, followed by my mother's shrill voice. "How dare you threaten me, Gemma? If you go through with this, you're dead to me. Do you hear me? Dead?" The line went dead, and I felt something inside me break. Even faced with overwhelming evidence, my mother chose Bethany. The golden child could do no wrong even when caught red-handed. Tyler put his arm around me, his own eyes glistening. "She doesn't deserve you, Gemma. Neither of them do." But I couldn't help mourning the final death of any hope for maternal support or love. Our evidence-gathering session was interrupted by Sandra's phone ringing. It was the federal prosecutor, and her face grew increasingly serious as she listened. "I understand. Yes, we can do that. Give us 30 minutes. She hung up and turned to us, her expression grim. "Carson is talking. He's trying to cut a deal, claiming Bethany masterminded everything. But he also revealed something disturbing. They've been setting up more evidence to frame you, Gemma. We need to check your apartment and car immediately." The race to my apartment was tense. I hadn't been back since my landlord's eviction notice, and the place felt foreign and unwelcoming. Sandra had called for police backup, and 2 officers met us there. It didn't take long to find what Bethany had planted. Hidden in my bedroom closet behind a box of winter clothes were several bank bags filled with cash. In my bathroom cabinet, tucked behind cleaning supplies, was a notebook with what appeared to be gambling records in handwriting that looked like mine, but wasn't. The final touch was a bag of pills hidden in my kitchen, prescription opioids with the label conveniently removed. "This is elaborate," one of the officers commented, carefully bagging the evidence. "Someone really wanted you to go down hard." The realization that my sister had been in my apartment violating my private space to plant evidence that could have sent me to prison for years made me physically ill. Tyler held my hair back as I vomited in the bathroom, the stress and betrayal finally overwhelming my system. But Bethany's plan had a fatal flaw. She'd been too thorough. The pills were traced to a prescription filled 3 days after I'd been suspended from the hospital when I had no access to the medical systems. The gambling notebook contained bets on games that happened while I was documented as being at work. The cash in the bank bags included bills from the serial number sequence Robert had flagged, directly linking them to the fraudulent withdrawals. In trying to frame me completely, she'd actually created evidence of her own guilt. The arrest happened that evening. I wasn't there to see it, but Tyler's friend who lived in Bethany's neighborhood sent us video. Federal agents surrounded the house just as Bethany was loading suitcases into her Mercedes. She was wearing designer clothing and full makeup, as if she'd been expecting to make a grand escape. The footage showed her being handcuffed, her perfect facade finally cracking as she screamed about being set up, about me being the real criminal. Carson was already in custody, having been arrested at the bank. As news of the arrest spread, my phone began ringing non-stop. Extended family members who'd shunned me suddenly wanted to express their support. Friends who'd believed Bethany's lies sent apologetic texts. But the call that mattered most came from my supervisor at the hospital. "Gemma, I've just been briefed by the FBI about the situation. I'm horrified that we fell for such an elaborate deception. Can you come in tomorrow? We want to discuss your immediate reinstatement and compensation for what you've endured." That night, Tyler and I sat in his studio surrounded by empty pizza boxes and half-finished paintings. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. "You know what the worst part is," I said, staring at a portrait Tyler had painted of our family during happier times. I would have helped her if she'd just asked. If Bethany had come to me and said they were in trouble, I would have given her money. Maybe not all of it, but something. She didn't have to do this. Tyler shook his head sadly. "That's the difference between you and her, Gemma. You see money as something to share, to help people. She sees it as something to take, to hoard, to use for status. Grandma knew that. That's why she left that money to you." As I prepared to face whatever came next, trials, family dissolution, rebuilding my life, I held on to that thought. My grandmother had trusted me, and despite everything Bethany had done to destroy that trust, I'd proven worthy of it. The war wasn't over. There would be trials, testimony, and the complete implosion of my family to navigate. But sitting there with Tyler, surrounded by art and truth, and the quiet satisfaction of justice, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks: peace. Bethany and Carson had tried to destroy me, but in the end, they'd only destroyed themselves. The evidence had surfaced, and with it, the truth that would set me free. The federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan was an imposing fortress of glass and steel, its corridors echoing with the footsteps of justice seekers and justice evaders alike. It had been 3 months since Bethany and Carson's arrests, 3 months of depositions, evidence reviews, and preparing for this moment. I stood outside courtroom 318, my hands steady despite the magnitude of what lay ahead. Tyler stood beside me wearing his only suit while Sandra reviewed her notes one final time. "Remember," Sandra murmured, "stick to the facts. Don't let the defense attorney rattle you. And whatever happens, don't react to anything Bethany says or does." I nodded, straightening my navy blazer. I'd chosen my outfit carefully. Professional, but not expensive, nothing that could be construed as flaunting the inheritance I'd never actually received. Through the courtroom doors, I could hear the murmur of voices, the shuffle of papers. My entire family was in there, forced to choose sides in the ultimate battle. As we entered, I immediately spotted my parents in the front row behind the defense table. My mother sat rigid as marble, her face, a mask of cold fury directed entirely at me. My father looked older, grayer, his shoulders slumped with the weight of his misplaced trust. They'd hired the best defense money could buy for Bethany, a team of sharks in $1,000 suits who'd spent months trying to poke holes in our airtight case. Bethany sat at the defense table wearing a demure gray dress that made her look like a Sunday school teacher rather than a calculating fraudster. Carson was notably absent, having pled guilty in exchange for testifying against his wife. The prosecutor, William Martinez, was a veteran of financial crimes with a reputation for being thorough and ruthless. He'd warned me that the defense would try everything to discredit me, to paint me as the real villain in this family tragedy. As I took my seat in the witness box, I saw Bethany turn to look at me. For just a moment, her mask slipped, and I saw pure hatred in her eyes. Then she resumed her victim pose, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue for the jury's benefit. "State your name for the record," the court clerk instructed. As I spoke, my voice rang clear and strong through the courtroom. The prosecutor began with simple questions establishing my background, my relationship with my grandmother, my work at the hospital. Then we moved into the meat of the matter. I testified about the Sunday brunch, the shocking accusations, the way my life had been systematically destroyed. The evidence was presented piece by piece: bank records, security footage, Anna's testimony via video link, as she was now in witness protection after receiving death threats. The defense attorney, Marcus Webb, approached me like a circling predator when his turn came. "Ms. Hamilton, isn't it true that you were struggling financially before your grandmother's death?" I met his gaze steadily. I was living within my means. I had a stable job, paid my bills on time, and had savings. He smirked, producing a document. "Yet you asked your mother for a $500 loan last year." "For car repairs, which I paid back within a month with interest," I replied calmly. "The receipt for that repayment is in evidence as Exhibit D12. Webb tried another angle. "You must have been angry when you learned your sister received more from your grandmother's main estate." Sandra had prepared me for this. I wasn't angry, because I didn't know about any inheritance until that Sunday. I thought the family heirlooms and main estate division were fair. I had no idea about the separate trust. The questioning continued for hours, Webb trying every possible angle to trip me up, to make me appear greedy, unstable, or vindictive. But the truth was my shield, and I wielded it with precision. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. Bethany took the stand in her own defense. She presented herself as the perfect daughter, the loving sister who'd only tried to help her troubled sibling. Her voice trembled as she spun a tale of my supposed gambling addiction, my desperate pleas for money, her attempts to stage an intervention. "I loved my sister," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I still do. I don't understand why she's doing this to our family." The performance was worthy of an Oscar, but the evidence spoke louder than her tears. Prosecutor Martinez destroyed her testimony methodically. He played the security footage of her in disguise at the bank. He presented the text messages between her and Anna, planning each withdrawal. He showed the receipts for luxury purchases made with the stolen cash. But the coup de grace came when he presented a new piece of evidence: a recording Tyler had made at the Sunday brunch capturing Bethany's initial suggestion that I had a drug problem before anyone had even examined the evidence. "How did you know to suggest your sister had a drug problem, Mrs. Whitman, before any investigation had taken place?" Martinez asked. Bethany's face went white as the recording played for the jury. The most damaging testimony came from an unexpected source: Carson himself. He appeared via video link from federal prison, where he was already serving time for his role in the fraud. His testimony was devastating, detailing how Bethany had planned everything from borrowing my ID to recruiting Anna. "She said Gemma didn't deserve the money," he testified. "Said she'd always been the better daughter and it was unfair that their grandmother had secret favorites. She was obsessed with maintaining our lifestyle, our image. When I hesitated, she threatened to leave me to tell everyone at my firm about my debts. As Carson spoke, I watched my mother's face transform. The cold certainty melted into horror as she realized she'd been defending the wrong daughter. My father had his head in his hands, unable to watch as the truth of Bethany's manipulation was laid bare. But it was too late for their regret to matter. They'd chosen their side, and now they had to live with the consequences. The defense made one last desperate play, calling my mother to the stand as a character witness for Bethany. It backfired spectacularly. Under cross-examination, Dorothy was forced to admit she'd never actually seen evidence of my supposed addictions, had never witnessed me asking Bethany for money, had based everything on what Bethany had told her. "I believed my daughter," she said weakly. "Which daughter?" Martinez pressed. "The one who lied to you or the one telling the truth?" My mother's eyes found mine across the courtroom, and for the first time in my life I saw shame in them. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. As we waited in a small conference room, Tyler paced nervously while Sandra reviewed her notes for the inevitable appeal. I sat quietly thinking about my grandmother, about how she'd somehow known to protect me, even from beyond the grave. When the call came to return to the courtroom, my heart was pounding, but my conscience was clear. The verdict was read in a somber voice. Guilty on all counts. Bethany's carefully constructed mask finally shattered completely. She lunged toward me, screaming obscenities, blaming me for ruining her life. The bailiffs restrained her as she shrieked, "You destroyed our family? You jealous, pathetic nothing, I wish you were dead." My mother tried to approach me after Bethany was led away in handcuffs, but I stepped back. "Gemma, please. I'm so sorry. I should have believed you. Can we talk?" I looked at the woman who'd given birth to me but chosen to believe lies over truth, who'd been willing to see me imprisoned rather than question her favorite daughter. "No," I said simply. "You made your choice. Now live with it." My father said nothing, couldn't even meet my eyes as they left the courthouse together, their perfect family revealed as the illusion it had always been. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited with cameras and questions, but Sandra and Tyler formed a protective shield around me. As we pushed through the crowd, I heard someone calling my name. It was Robert Dalton from the bank, accompanied by several of my former colleagues from the hospital. "We wanted you to know," Robert said, "that First National is establishing new protocols because of what you uncovered. You've helped protect future victims." My supervisor Janet hugged me tightly. "And the hospital board has approved a special commendation for your integrity under pressure. Your job is waiting whenever you're ready." That evening, Tyler and I returned to his studio for a quiet celebration. He'd painted a new portrait during the trial, me standing strong despite the storm around me. "You know what Grandma would say?" he asked, uncorking a bottle of wine. "She'd say you prove that truth and courage matter more than money and appearances." As we toasted to justice and new beginnings, I thought about the family I'd lost and the integrity I'd kept. The price had been high, but my conscience was clear. The sentencing came 2 weeks later. Bethany received 5 years in federal prison for wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. The judge called her actions a calculated betrayal of family trust that shocks the conscience. She would also have to pay full restitution, though the money she'd stolen was long gone. Carson got 3 years, his cooperation earning him a lighter sentence. Anna received probation and community service, the court recognizing her as a victim of manipulation rather than a willing conspirator. As I left the courthouse for the final time, I felt a chapter of my life closing. The inheritance that had caused so much pain would finally be mine, but it felt tainted now, colored by the betrayal it had revealed. I decided then what I would do with it. Establish a foundation for fraud victims, particularly those betrayed by family members. My grandmother's money would help others who'd been where I was alone, and fighting for the truth against those who should have protected them. It seemed the perfect way to honor her memory and transform pain into purpose. 6 months after the trial, I stood in the children's ward of the hospital, watching my young patient Emma draw a picture of butterflies. She was one of our success stories in remission after a brutal battle with leukemia. Her smile reminded me why I'd chosen this profession, why helping heal others had always mattered more to me than money or status. The ward had been my sanctuary. When I returned to work, my colleagues embracing me with a warmth my own family never had. Here, I wasn't the nurse who'd been falsely accused, or the woman who'd sent her sister to prison. I was just Gemma, the nurse who always had time for one more story, one more hug, one more moment of comfort. The healing journey hadn't been linear. There were nights I woke up in cold sweats dreaming of that Sunday brunch, of my mother's cold eyes, of Bethany's hatred. I'd started therapy working through the trauma of being betrayed by those who should have loved me most. Dr. Martinez, my therapist, helped me understand that my family's dysfunction ran deeper than just this incident. The golden child dynamic, my mother's conditional love, my father's emotional absence, these patterns had existed long before the inheritance brought them to light. Tyler had become more than just my brother. He'd become my best friend and chosen family. His documentary about our ordeal, titled Blood Money, a Family Fraud, had premiered at Sundance to critical acclaim. He'd donated his profits to the Fraud Victim Foundation I'd established with grandmother's inheritance. The foundation had already helped dozens of people navigate the legal and emotional complexities of family financial abuse. We provided legal referrals, therapy resources, and, most importantly, a community of survivors who understood the unique pain of family betrayal. My apartment in Queens had become a real home for the first time. I decorated it with Tyler's paintings and photographs from my travels with newfound friends. The inheritance minus what went to the foundation had given me financial security, but I continued to live modestly. I'd learned that money's true value lay not in what it could buy, but in the good it could do. Every month, I received letters from people the foundation had helped, their stories of survival and recovery, reminding me that something beautiful had grown from my pain. Surprisingly, it was Aunt Helen who became the bridge to healing some family relationships. She'd been horrified by her sister's behavior during the trial and had cut off contact with my parents for months. But she'd stayed in touch with me, offering the maternal support my own mother couldn't provide. Through her, I learned that my parents' marriage was struggling, the weight of their choices crushing the facade they'd maintained for so long. "Your mother knows she failed you," Aunt Helen told me over tea one afternoon. "She may never admit it, but she knows." I'd found unexpected healing in writing. What started as journal entries for therapy became a blog about surviving family betrayal. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of people sharing their own stories, finding comfort in knowing they weren't alone. A publisher approached me about turning it into a book, and I'd spent evenings after work crafting chapters that might help others navigate their own family traumas. The advance would go entirely to the foundation, another way to transform pain into purpose. Romance wasn't on my radar, but James arrived anyway. He was a pediatric surgeon at the hospital who'd been quietly supportive throughout my ordeal. He'd never pushed, never pried, just offered steady friendship that slowly blossomed into something more. Our first date was coffee in the hospital cafeteria, both of us in scrubs, laughing about the glamorous lives of medical professionals. He understood my trust issues, my need to take things slowly. "I'm not going anywhere," he'd said simply, and somehow I believed him. The letter from Bethany arrived on a random Tuesday, forwarded through my lawyer. I'd stared at the federal prison postmark for an hour before opening it. Her handwriting was still perfect, even in captivity. She wrote about finding religion, about realizing the depth of her sins, about hoping for forgiveness she knew she didn't deserve. She claimed to understand now that her jealousy and greed had poisoned everything good in our lives. I read it twice, then filed it away. Forgiveness would come in time maybe, but trust was forever broken. My father reached out next, a hesitant email asking if we could meet for coffee. I agreed, curious, more than hopeful. We met at a neutral location, a diner neither of us had history with. He looked older, smaller somehow, his commanding presence diminished by the weight of his choices. "I failed you," he said without preamble. "I let my pride and Bethany's manipulations blind me to the truth. Your mother and I, we're separating. Too much damage, too many lies." I listened without comment as he spoke about therapy, about trying to understand how he'd been so wrong. When he finished, I simply said, "I hope you find peace, Dad." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. The 1-year anniversary of that fateful Sunday brunch found me surrounded by chosen family. Tyler had organized a dinner at his new gallery space, a beautiful loft he'd been able to afford thanks to his documentary's success. Janet from the hospital was there, along with several colleagues who'd become true friends. Sandra, my lawyer, had become a mentor and confidant. James held my hand under the table, a quiet presence of support. Even Aunt Helen came, bringing a photo album of Grandma Rose I'd never seen. As we raised our glasses in a toast, Tyler stood to speak. "A year ago, our family imploded. We lost people we thought we could trust, beliefs we thought were solid. But look what we gained: truth, integrity, and a family bound not by blood but by choice. Grandma Rose always said that character was revealed in crisis. Gemma, you revealed yours, and it's pure gold." The tears came, then healing tears that washed away the last of the bitterness I'd been carrying. Later that evening, as James and I walked through the city streets, he asked what I wanted for the future. I thought about it, about all I'd lost and all I'd gained. "I want to help children heal," I said. "I want to run the foundation and maybe write more. I want to build a life based on truth and kindness. And maybe—" I smiled at him. "I want to see where this goes." He squeezed my hand and we walked on in comfortable silence. The final entry in my journal that night was simple. Family isn't about blood. It's about who stands by you when the world tries to tear you down. Bethany tried to destroy me with her lies, but she only revealed the strength I didn't know I had. Grandma Rose protected me even in death, and her greatest gift wasn't the money. It was the chance to discover who really loved me. The pain was worth the truth. The loss was worth the freedom. And sometimes the greatest blessing is finding out who your real family is, even if it costs you everything you thought you knew. As I closed the journal and prepared for bed, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. It was someone who'd read my blog, thanking me for giving them hope that they could survive their own family betrayal. I smiled, remembering my own dark nights when I thought the pain would never end. Now I knew better. Pain ends. Truth endures. And sometimes the most beautiful gardens grow from the most broken ground. Looking back at everything that had happened, the accusations, the betrayal, the legal battle, the family explosion, I realized I wouldn't change any of it. Not because it wasn't painful, but because it had revealed essential truths. I'd learned who I really was when everything was stripped away. I discovered that integrity mattered more than approval, that chosen family could be stronger than blood ties, that helping others heal could heal your own wounds. Bethany had tried to steal more than money. She'd tried to steal my identity, my reputation, my future. But in fighting for truth, I'd found something she could never take myself. The Gemma Rose Foundation's first annual gala was scheduled for next month, with Tyler designing the invitations and James helping with logistics. We expected to raise enough to help hundreds of fraud victims in the coming year. My book would be published in the spring with a foreword by a renowned psychologist specializing in family trauma. Life had moved forward in ways I'd never imagined during those dark days of accusation and abandonment. The girl who'd poured coffee that Sunday morning, innocent and trusting, was gone. In her place stood a woman who knew her worth, who'd earned her strength, who'd chosen truth over comfort and integrity over acceptance. As sleep finally claimed me, I thought one last time about forgiveness. Not for my mother who'd chosen her favorite daughter over truth. Not for Bethany whose greed had poisoned everything it touched. But for myself. For any moments of doubt, for any times I'd wondered if fighting was worth it. It was. It absolutely was. Because in losing the family I was born into, I'd found the family I was meant to have. And that more than any inheritance was Grandma Rose's true gift to me. If you've made it this far in my story, you know that family betrayal cuts deeper than any other wound. But you also know that survival is possible, that truth eventually surfaces, and that sometimes losing everything you thought mattered helps you find what actually does. Have you ever faced betrayal from someone you trusted completely? How did you find the strength to fight for truth when everyone seemed against you? Share your story in the comments below, because your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. If this story touched your heart or reminded you of your own strength, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of triumph over family trauma. Share this with anyone who needs to know they're not alone in their fight for truth. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, your real family consists of those who believe in you when the rest of the world turns away. Until next time, stay strong and never let anyone make you doubt your truth.